This is just a quick updated video on how to use paint effects in Maya with Arnold. So paint effects is a method for sort of painting geometry into your scene. If you go into the modeling toolkit here, or sorry, modeling module, go to generate and get brush, it will open up our content visor here. And under paint effects, you can see there are lots of different brush types, from animal, snake tube, hands, to scribbles, things like that. But the thing that kind of makes most sense when you're thinking about paint effects is talking about plants. So if you wanted to put plants in your scene, mainly as background objects, because they are sort of low resolution, not much detail, but they are good for filling in a scene. So let's say we take something kind of typical that you might use. Let's choose these onions. So we choose that. I'll close this and I'll just increase my brush size. Hold down B, left mouse drag. Okay, that's not working. So it's just drawing. So normally if you hold down B and click, yeah, you can change the size of your brush. And then if you click and drag, it will grow these objects along here. Let's just go back to these originals. And you can see, if we get in close, that they are kind of low-res objects without much detail, lots of overlapping geometry. And if we put a light into the scene, in order to render, let's just put a ground plane in here too. And if we open the Arnold render view to render, see, nothing shows up. So let's just talk about the paint effects first before we talk about the rendering. But just know that if you're trying to render, don't feel frustrated, because there's a step we have to take to make them Arnold friendly. So if we look at the paint effects here, I'm not going to go too deeply into this, but there's a stroke, and that's the curve on the ground that you were drawing with your brush. And so there are some things you can change with the stroke, like the end bound, so you can adjust this, and you can even use this to animate things growing or appearing along here, so the min and max clip. And there are some other things you can change in here, but most of it is in the brush node, and this one's called onion. So there's a global scale, so you can just adjust the overall size here. Brush profile is like the width, its softness, how flat it is. We can forget most of that for now. There's shading in here, but we're going to convert this to polygons, so we'll do the shading in Arnold. Same with texturing. There are textures built in here, but we'll reconnect them with Arnold. There's illumination built in, there's glow, but the most important part is this tubes creation, and this is tubes per step. So these things that grow out of the stroke on the ground are called tubes. And so if we increase the tubes per step, you can see that we get more of them. Per step is how fast you are dragging along. Then you have like length min and length max, so you can vary these. There's tube width 1 and tube width 2. 1 is always on the ground, or towards the ground, and the number 2 will always be the width away from the ground. So we can alter these. Some of these have built-in animation, and I'm not sure I'll be able to show you with this one, but I'll show you where those settings are. And then width scale, so you can change this so they get skinnier in the middle, and you can, or have them taper towards the end, so you can do lots of things like this. And then growth, are they growing branches? Yes, these are branches. Flowers, there are flowers in here. It's kind of hard to predict how they're going to work. It seems like the base are flowers. The number of branches, so you can increase or decrease this. or sorry, start branches and then number of branches after that, but we don't have any divisions. Then where they're going to split into new branches. So it's a sort of a way to represent a growing hierarchical object. If you had twigs turned on, then you can control the number of twigs here and so on. So you can take a look at all these things. Right. And then there's behavior, displacement. This is how they're bending along their length. You can add noise to these. You can add curl and so on. You can put forces in the world, so you can make them attract to the path they were grown on, so you can make them bend towards that. You can have curve follow. We don't have a curve in the scene, but you could put a hair in the scene that's growing out. And if the hair is dynamic and moving around, you can get them to follow that curve. So you can't make paint effects truly dynamic, but you can use other dynamic objects to try to drive their motion. So there's turbulence in here. Now, honestly, it doesn't always work very well, but if we do something like grass wind, okay, for once it works. It's amazingly inconsistent. This is old technology in Maya that is handy for some things, but not always to be totally relied upon. You can see it's acting a little weird because I changed the displacement value and some other things. So that's grass wind. Could turn it into tree wind, which mostly ignores the base, like the trunk wouldn't move as much, although this is acting a little weird. Or you can have local force, right? So they're just, it acts a little strangely, but it can work in some cases. But if we got this into a shape that we wanted, this is not a good shape, but you can go to modify, convert, paint effects to polygons, and now we have a mesh group for these, replacing this. And so now if we render, you can see that they actually are there, but not great. If we select these and add a new material and use the AI standard surface, now they'll render somewhat properly. I kind of chose a really bad example for the way they do the base of the onion here. Let's choose a better example. Let's just delete that. So let's just show that again. So another thing you can do is select a piece of geometry, go to generate, and you can make it paintable. And then if we go to generate and get a brush, and let's choose something else like tree mesh or plant mesh rather than just plants. Ladder, fern, creeper. Maybe we'll just choose grasses. Yeah, let's try some jungle grass. Make my brush a little bit bigger. Maybe a little big. Kind of big. So into my stroke, I can change, in my brush, I can change my global scale and just reduce this. Now this could have animation built in. No. So this is one of the inconsistent things, but if we go into turbines, I think it's turned off, so we turn on grass wind. Okay, so that is actually working. Tree wind. Okay, so if you're building an underwater scene or something and you needed this, this is pretty handy for background elements. So again, if we just select this and go to Modify, Convert, Paint Effects to Polygons, now it should be renderable. Okay, so it is renderable, but it's not showing up very well. So again, if we look in here, we have, let's just look at the hypershade before we assign a new material to see what comes in here. Just open my browser. So here's the jungle grass leaf shader, and here is the jungle grass sort of stem shader. So we can map these two. These are not using Arnold shaders, they're using Fongs. And you can see that it does come with an image. This is actually a ramp made to look like a leaf. So we can actually use this ourselves if we want to. You can see that it makes separate objects for the leaves and for the stems. So we can assign a new material just to the stems. So in Arnold, standard surface. And let's just name this before we forget, stem. And we can hook up the same things that were going into the stem shader here, namely this ramp that's going into the color. So if we want to do this, we can take this existing ramp and just map it to the base color here. And then same thing, we'll assign a new material to the leaves. And let's rename this quickly. I know this is tiny right now. I'll get in a bit closer. And so here is what was going into the color for the leaf. So we'll just map that into our new shader. Then it had some other weird stuff going on. So oak leaf GIF. Ramp going into a multiply divide node. This is like the AI composite node we've seen elsewhere. And that's going into specular color. So let's do the same thing. I don't know what this is going to be like. I actually haven't tried it. So we can take this into our specular color here. And is there anything else? Transparency, yes. So we would put this into our opacity channel in the AI standard surface. So the out color going into opacity. Now theirs is transparency, ours is opacity, so we might have to reverse this. Actually, I don't know what this is going to be like. Let's try and render. So we're getting a weird error. Doesn't like that GIF. Ooh, 2.3 gigabytes reading that GIF. That's kind of strange. So in that case, I would probably just get rid of that and see if we can just build this with this ramp. Doesn't seem, does it rely on the GIF? It does. So if we just break those connections in our, it's going into both the leaf and the stem. No, just the leaf. Sorry, I know this is a big mess right here. And it's also going into the base color. So I'm just gonna, so for the leaf, we'll just give it our own color. And the specular color. So let's just give it a green color and see what the renders look like now. Right, so we don't need all that GIF and everything, and that looks pretty good. If we get in close, it might start to kind of fall apart a little bit. Yeah, like, I mean, these things aren't actually connected. But for like a background image where you just need some kind of filler, let me turn up my light. Let's put a big light in here. Let's save this scene. Skydome lights are always too bright. Right, so you can kind of make something kind of interesting. And if I'm not mistaken, because we haven't deleted history on this, even though these are converted to polygons, they still are animated. And you can still go back into that original Paint Effects node, brush, and alter that. So if I select this and go back into the Paint Effects brush, should be here, jungle grass. Nope, so if we just go into behavior, tubes, behavior, turbulence. If I turn up the turbulence a lot, now you can see that it's all still connected, right? So these aren't true dynamic objects in the sense of nucleus things, but it can be useful for building up background objects in your scene. And by converting them to meshes, then they can be given Arnold materials and can work from there. And if we just look at this, you can see the leaves are all one object and the stems are all one object too. So they're not separated. Okay, give it a try and try and build a scene and try and render it and see what it looks like.